Green Hunter, Fei Chung, Larry, Love Mokadenge, Mavuso Mismang, and of course our special guests, Gift Mugano and Nick Donovan. Khadija hasn't joined us yet. She's in another meeting. She'll be joining us soon. Our discussion, very easy topic, and perhaps also familiar, Zimbabwe's financial crisis. We want to examine through our eminent panelists, in particular our main presenter, Professor Gift Mugano, what's the nature of the financial crisis? Is the financial crisis the same thing as the currency crisis? Or is the currency crisis and a reflection of a broader crisis, the economic crisis? Can we have a brief analysis of that? What are the causes of the crisis? Perhaps well known, but perhaps Professor Mugano can outline those as well. And of course, the new kid on the block, ZIG. What is ZIG all about? What does ZIG appear to have failed as the 5 previous currencies before it? And as is the purpose of such a forum as ours is not just to criticize, condemn, it's also to offer solutions through experts such as yourselves. So this evening, we will have Gift Mugano outlining the problematic for us, and then we'll have Nick Donovan after him to try and probe the extent to which the problem of corruption has contributed to the economic crisis. Khadija will come later, and as an investigative journalist as she is, throw some light on the problem of this gold, the gold crisis, the gold mafia. To what extent has this impacted on the crisis in Zimbabwe and in the region, really? And is it a vain expectation that Zimbabwe is saying that the ZIG, the new currency, will be backed by the gold reserves and US dollar reserves? To what extent is that a credible explanation? So, without much ado, I call on Professor Gift Mugano. Gift, Mzukuru, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. You forgive me, my light is not good, so maybe I can remove my video. Is it okay?
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor to come to your platform, a very important platform. I respect your guests here, in everyone. I respect you so much. I'm just going to go into this discussion. I'll give a context of where we're coming from very briefly. Then I'll talk about the current measures which has been put in place by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. And as you are directing me, Sekuru, I will then also try to give some solutions on what should be done to save our currency. So you asked me to unpack financial crisis. So basically, financial crisis is a big elephant where you could see that in a particular economy, it manifests in a number of areas. Your stock market will be crashing. You default in payment of debt. Then, of course, the currency crisis, where the currency of a particular country is losing value. So we can look at 2007, 2008 global financial crisis. That was a exploding financial crisis because all the architecture or the infrastructure of finance, the financial infrastructure was in disarray. In Zimbabwe, we have our financial crisis being interpreted as a currency crisis, but then it therefore goes on to impair the assets of the banking sector and in some extent the financial, the stock market. You might be aware that in 2008, the stock market was closed. Can you hear me? So sorry, I was saying, okay, thank you.
We can hear you very clearly.
Okay, thank you. So you might be aware that in 2008, our stock market was suspended. It was closed because it had just gone into it totally collapsed. So we had a full-blown financial crisis in 2008. But I would want to argue that we have not reached the financial crisis, full-blown financial crisis. Where we stand today, we have a serious currency crisis, which is kind of an element of financial crisis. So where are we coming from? I'll be very brief on this one, just to know our history. On 14 November 1997, then our president, Robert Mugabe, may he so rest in peace, gave a directive to the Minister of Finance to print, if I'm not mistaken, 4.2 billion Zimbabwean dollars to pay the war veterans. And on that date, 14 November 1997, the Zimbabwean dollar against $1 US was 1:10. So because of that decision, printing of money, they lost the value of our currency. We had a crash of our currency. The exchange rate crashed from 1:10 to rounded up 1:18. So in actual sense, the currency lost the value by 80% within 24 hours. I'm emphasizing this because I want to make a point that the challenge which we have in terms of our currency crisis normally is manifesting on excessive printing of money, right? So from that time up to today, we have lost about 6 currencies. From Zimbabwean dollar to US dollar, we lost the US dollar, we went to bond note, we came to RTGS, we came to Zimbabwe dollar local, went back to US dollar, now we have ZIG. The major issue here is that when you print money, we know what was happening in the last 2 decades, that Zimbabwe has been printing money. And when you print a lot of money, you know, too much money is not good for the currency, because you will be chasing US dollars with that money, and eventually you lose the value of the currency. The exchange rate depreciate. You know, the time of Dr. Gono, he had a printing machine. But I think it's only fair for me to say the crisis which we are facing in terms of currency crisis, I want to narrow my discussion on currency crisis, is mainly not only on printing of money alone. We also have to look at production. In early 2000, we had a disruptive land reform, which saw that the disruption of value chain and the financing models which were supporting the agricultural sector and the industry were disrupted. And farmers, white commercial farmers, had an established relationship with the banks. Then they were given money through institutional transactional lending, rather. And our new farmers took time to settle down, and we are still settling down. And we have not reached the levels where we were. We are a basket case right now. So the best way to bake our currency, to have a strong currency, is to be productive. And we have lost that along the way. And it's important for me to underline this, because we hear that the government is baking the ZIG with the gold, but you can't bake the currency without also baking the production, because you end up facing drainage of foreign currency, as we will be facing now. I'll come back to that a bit later. But I wanted to mention that. Again, early 2000 also witnessed a capital flight because of the land reform, the political tension, and also sanctions which were given to this country had a bearing effect on the access to capital. Now, so we traveled this journey. We then adopted US dollars, and after unity government, we went into new currency on 20 February 2019 called RTGS. We started at an exchange rate of 2.5 RTGS against $1. I'll come back to this point a bit later. Then in June 2019, the Minister of Finance then announced that we're now using Zimbabwe dollar local. So those currencies were named interchangeably Zimbabwe dollar local and RTGS. But in March 2020, US dollar came back because bad money chases away good money. So we are now in a more current regime. But in recent weeks, we witnessed massive depreciation of our local currency on the from both formal and black market. It is important for me to highlight that in December, our exchange rate was 6,000 Zimbabwean dollars, official exchange rate, against $1 US. And as such, our budget, which was presented by the Minister of Finance, was around $57 trillion, was equivalent to about $9 billion US, if you want to use the official exchange rate. But we all witnessed the development which took place in terms of road development. Just coming closer home so that we can understand what is happening. There's a lot of roadworks and infrastructure development, and you can then see why the rate was running away. And I'm emphasizing this point because it is important for us to appreciate the contribution of Ministry of Finance to the currency instability in Zimbabwe. When they pay contractors, I know that they also pay them US dollars. In some instances, it's as much as 80% of the invoice, but still 20% of that invoice in Zimbabwean dollar is creating havoc. That is why the rate ran away to reach 40,000 against $1 US in first week of April. And the official exchange rate was sitting at 33,882 Zimbabwean dollars. So government of Zimbabwe made a decision when the governor of central bank, now I'm looking at the monetary policy, intervention by central bank, they put a number of measures to try to arrest the situation. The first thing was to liberalize the exchange rate, because for the last 5 years or so, we were using a controlled exchange rate. And the auction system became the market for the controlled exchange rate. And funny enough, central bank has been refusing this. They were denying this whenever we say that the exchange rate is controlled. And you can't have command economics in the modern day. And now they are now saying we are liberalizing the exchange rate. In actual sense, they are now coming back to willing buyer, willing seller. Something which was introduced by the governor of central bank on 20 February 2019, when he introduced the interbank market. So we are back to the interbank market. But the interbank market only functioned for 6 months, and it failed to work because of the structural nature of our financial system. We have structural challenges in the banking sector. Few banks have control of foreign currency. The majority of the banks, and I'm not mentioning them on professional reasons, don't have access to, they don't have a significant share of the market in terms of supply of foreign currency. So we have an oligopoly. Few players are in the market with a significant amount of money, maybe in 2-3 banks. And so the other ones are like orphans in the financial markets. They don't have money to trade. And interbank trades are not taking place where one bank with excess supply of money is giving the other bank because of, I'm sure the banks, I would want to be polite and diplomatic, that I guess that they don't have good relationships to trade among themselves. But that is the reason. So willing buyer, willing seller is not working. And so even if you look at today, Governor of Central Bank introduced the ZIG by slashing zeros, divided the Zimbabwean dollar balances by $2,500. That then gives you the current balances in your bank account or in your wallet. And the official exchange rate is 13 zig, 13.56 zig, and I see it as going back to 2019 20 February, where the governor of central bank then, Dr. Manguja, introduced interbank market at 2.5. Same approach. So the question is that, are we going to see a well-functioning interbank market? So if it is functioning, why is the exchange rate remaining at 13.56, somewhere there where it was? Why is it not fluctuating like what we see? Particularly when you see the black market rate is at 23 zig against $1. Isn't it any case that there is high demand for foreign currency? Why is it not moving up in the formal market? Why is the black market moving alone? And the governor said that if you want foreign currency, go to your bank. Why are we seeing the black market running away? So these are the interventions put by the central bank. They backed the local currency by reserves of gold of 2.5 tons, 1.5 tons in country, and 1.1 ton, 2.6 rather, 1.1 outside Zimbabwe. And again, we question now. I know there's going to be a speaker going to talk about issue of corruption and transparency and gold issues. So the question, which I also want to challenge the speaker to say, is it the norm that a Reserve Bank of a particular country will not trust itself to keep 1 ton of gold and keep it outside the country? Is it the norm? Who is going to be auditing that custodian of our gold, whom we don't know? Where is transparency? That is a big question I want to put. But also coming back to say, the $285 million equivalent of 2.5 tons of gold and $100 million $100 million of cash is the one which you are being told is backing the Zimbabwean dollar, which the governor said that is $2.6 trillion and is equivalent to $90 million as per his monetary policy statement, although he's moving around saying it's equivalent to $80 million. But the long and short, these are the interventions given by central bank to stabilize the currency and to make sure that they arrest inflation. I left one point, they reduced the exchange rate, the interest rate from 130% to 20%. And excess liquidity is going to be wiped out by non-negotiable certificates, which are non-interest bearing. So I now want to review what are the implications of these measures on the stability of our currency or restoring currency stability. So starting with the best way to back our currency is to be productive. I want to argue that. And also, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe must always look at the Minister of Finance contribution to currency instability. If you listen to the governor of central bank's presentation, he's biased towards his own financial sector position to say, I have 80 million equivalent, so I have a backup, but he's not looking at what is happening in the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance liquidity, because now when we're at the university, we're taught of money supply. And how do you manage money supply? Use open market operation where you're selling treasury bills, you move money in the market. We were not taught about excess liquidity coming from treasury. We were taught of liquidity as easiness to convert your assets into cash. But in Zimbabwe, it's a new phenomenon where you see that Ministry of Finance have got a monetary effect on the exchange rate when they pay contractors, because these contractors run and buy foreign currency to preserve the value of the money, and also they need foreign currency to finance their operation. So I'm surprised when I look at them running after money changers. I don't condone illegal money changing, but the biggest money changers are contractors, because once they are given money, and they are not stationed at 4th Street in Zimbabwe, they are stationed in offices, and whenever they are paid, they change their money into US dollars for them to preserve currency. So these guys have put a little money on the road. That's why even the governor was saying in Parliament yesterday, he sent his financial intelligence unit to try to buy $100,000. He couldn't. But those guys are just poor people who are unemployed, who are trying to make a $10 profit. So they're not a big issue as far as I'm concerned. So this is the disaster which is going to happen on ZIG, which happened on the bond note. Also, we need to remind each other that in 2016, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe introduced a bond note, and they said that they are backing it by Afro-Exim Bank, $400 million guarantee. And the governor of Central Bank made two serious statements, Dr. Mangojga. He said that he's not going to print amount of bond note exceeding 200 million US dollar equivalent, or 200 million bond note, because it was 1:1. And they said he is not going to print a bond note if there are no exports, because there were export incentives. Then third, he said, if the bond note fails, I'm going to resign. But the bond note failed. And the Afro-Exim Bank is an international bank, high repute, but again, it did not work. So there's a very bad precedence in central bank. Even the governor says he has enough reserves, and not under my watch. Those statements are no longer valid in Zimbabwe. But also to say that the other challenge which we have is that we have reduced interest rate from 130% to 20%. I would tell you that to me, the way the governor is reading this, he's seeing that he's reading it as if the ZIG is now in the league with the US dollars. They're same age boys now. ZIG is Zimbabwean dollar. It doesn't appeal like, it's not even anywhere closer to the rand. So reducing interest rate to 20% is creating an opportunity for speculative behavior. Anyone who pounds his hand on Zimbabwean dollar will just run to the black market and buy foreign currency and hold back and service interest rate of 1.6% per month is nothing. It's just getting free money in Zimbabwe. And banks, if I'm in the banking sector, if I sit on the board of a bank, clearly I will not advise banks to lend money to production, because it's like you are causing your own impairment of your own assets. I would rather advise the bank to buy assets, land. And right now, I would want to challenge you, go and buy land. You can't buy land. It's very expensive. It tells you that there's a lot of activity in the land market, in the property market, and as opposed to production. So what does it mean to the ZIG? We defend our currency through production. Again, we have constrained lending going to production. The second tragedy, which is within the monetary policy from the central bank governor, is his decision to retain 25% of foreign currency from exports. If we are anticipating exports of $7.5 billion, according to the Ministry of Finance, and if I use that figure as a true, without doubting it, it means that 25% of $7.5 billion in terms of exports, it's $1.875 billion, which will be taken by central bank. And in his in the banking system, we have an equivalent of 80 million Zimbabwean dollar or ZIG, which is in the system, which is 10%, less than 10%, so less than 10% of 1.8 billion. In actual sense, we have 80 million. He just he's got 80 million. So he doesn't have 1.795 billion, which is required to settle those exports. I listened to one of his remarks in the public domain that he's not going to print money, because I had also indicated that he's going to print money. He said that he is going to allow banks to trade amongst themselves when the exporters, they're banked by private banks, not by central bank. So the banks will have to trade amongst themselves to mobilize this money, which is required to pay exporters in Zimbabwean dollar. And so half of it is going to come from the banks, and half of it is going to come from Treasury. When Treasury, they use their budget to pay for 900 million. Then the 900 million, the other one is going to come from the banking sector. So I would not want to talk about the capacity of Treasury to pay for the 900 million. I just want to focus on the banking sector. In the banking sector, the reserve money which is there is equivalent to 80 million. So even if he's going to say the banking sector are going to mobilize their own money to pay for that 900 million. They don't have that money. And to make things worse, he is issuing non-negotiable instruments to mop excess liquidity of the same 80 million. So it's contradicting himself. Now, so definitely he's going to print money. And once he print money, definitely the people are going to pounce that money is going to find itself on the black market and the rate will run away. So he has no choice, he will print money. And that will defeat the ZIG. Right? The other point I also want to mention, it's the lack of confidence in the market. Zimbabweans have been beaten several times, not even twice. We have changed currencies in a number of times.
Are you okay?
So I am back. It had just switched off.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So there's no confidence in this market. And what is disheartening is that the lack of confidence is led by government. Government has refused their own currency, and we have been debating this, that the only way to give some lifeline to ZIG, and I want to argue this because it's part of the recommendation. I'm criticizing it, but I'm also giving a recommendation. Government create demand for ZIG by allowing it to be accepted at the passport office, at the fuel stations, enforce the use of multi-currency regime. There's no way central bank will say they will enforce use of
a gift. A gift.
Maybe I need to join it my phone. I think I'm being. Maybe some of our audience don't want to hear what I'm saying. Okay.
Right.
Okay. All right. So if government refuse to accept their own ZIG at the passport office, duty, payment of duty, clearly it doesn't build the confidence for the public to accept the ZIG as well. I want to give a simple extra illustration, Prof. Imagine government make a decision to say ZIG is acceptable for payment of duty. The same, if you don't have ZIG, you can use US dollars. Colleagues in the tuck shop business who are selling groceries who also accept ZIG because they know that when they are going to buy groceries and they have to pay duty, they will use ZIG. And a civil servant does not need to change his or her salaries into US dollars because at the tuck shop, you can still pay using ZIG. Likewise, if you go to the fuel station, you pay using ZIG. Why would I worry about using US dollars? Because what I want is a commodity. So that's where we are failing as a nation. Government is leading the pack in terms of confidence. Now, when they do that now, they are creating room for people to go on the black market because there's no government will to accept the same currency. So the buck stops on government of Zimbabwe. They must lead in this area of accepting the ZIG. I want to also pick on this absence of structural policies. You know, in Zimbabwe for the last 20 years or so, we were a bit silent on critical policies such as your industrial policy, supply side policies, your industrial policy, your agricultural policy. It's a bit active, but not there because they are still using command agriculture. And other supply side policy like the energy plan for electricity. So you have not heard of any forum. I can challenge you when we are going for a forum where we want to hear the Minister of Industry and Commerce talking about industrial policy, coming with various sector-specific strategies. Your integrated steel plant strategy, leather strategy. We have 20 critical sectors in the industry, in the manufacturing sector. We have not heard those strategies and they report on how they are performing to substitute imports to drive exports. And resultantly, our exports, 92% are raw materials, your minerals and agriculture. Only 8% tourism and manufacturing cluttered there. So we are doing nothing there. That is where we are failing. We have not heard of any plan of a plan on energy, right, from the Minister of Energy. We hear of the Manizi, and I hear the Manizi need about 500 megawatts. Yet our demand, national demand, is 2,000 megawatts, right? So already this demand has been there since 1990. We don't have a new demand of electricity for this country. And what is the plan to fill the gap? So the challenge which is happening, and I want to kind of, I'm ending in 5 minutes, is that everything is concentrated at the central bank as the silver bullet. Everything is concentrated at the Ministry of Finance as the silver bullet. Yet, ideally, the fiscal policy at the Ministry of Finance and the monetary policy at the central bank is the icing on the cake. The real cake is industrial policy, trade policy, and other sector-specific policy like mining policy, energy policy, and various strategies. Then the monetary policy coming in as incentivizing, so as the fiscal policy. So that is missing. And the governor is not even seeing that in his advice of the government. I would have wanted to see him putting an advisory note in the monetary policy to say, we expect to see these policies coming into complement. I also challenged the Minister of Finance last week to say they must come up with complementary fiscal measures to support the monetary policy. And they've not done so. They said they will do it. Sustainability of ZIG through arresting people. The government of Zimbabwe has no capacity to arrest 7 million people in the informal sector. The government of Zimbabwe need to deal with the shocks such as drought, and this we can do it quite well if we build resilience and productivity in the agricultural sector. We have land to the size of 33 million hectares, but we are only using 11% of that, just above 3 million hectares, arable land. We have over 14,000 dams, water bodies, which can irrigate over 2 million hectares of land. We are only irrigating 194,000 hectares. And we are having serious drought. We don't have strategic grain reserves, and we are taking out money. So this year is a bad year. I want to round up by saying that there are external shocks, which are quite massive. Your drought is going to be draining over $4 billion in terms of food and raw materials required to supply the manufacturing sector. And our import bill is going to be around $9 billion US. And our exports are going to be around $7 billion. So we have a big trade deficit. And when you have a big trade deficit, you're going to have natural exchange rate spiral. There's no question about that. We have external shocks coming on the back of Russia-Ukraine war. Food prices are going up. There's serious crisis in the Middle East, and they are blocking the movement of sheep. So the price of fuel will be going up. We have external shock in the sense that the commodity prices of platinum, chrome, lithium, and other base metals is falling, and our export receipts also be going down. We are just lucky that gold is fetching a higher price. I think gold is the only commodity which is attracting a good price. So as I round up, I would want to make it on the record that the ZIG is not going to succeed simply because government has refused to create demand for their own currency. And if they want to succeed, they must create demand for their own currency. They must not be selective or discriminatory in the application of multi-currency regime. That on its own creates challenges in terms of trust and confidence. If you want ZIG to succeed, you need to power it to production. We need to recalibrate our financing model on the infrastructure and move away from short-term finance, use of cash to pay contractors, to long-term finance, where we use diaspora bonds, public-private partnership, built on operate transfer as a mechanism to finance road, as a mechanism to finance infrastructure. But as long as government is using the budget to use cash to finance long-term infrastructure, ZIG is not going to succeed. I would want to end by saying I want ZIG to succeed because I'm a Zimbabwean. I also want to make savings. I also want to be proud to have money in the bank and look at my bank statement, what you were doing, Professor Mandaza, when you were growing up, when you were working, you would just take a statement. This time around, we can't do that. How are we going to teach our kids to save money? How can we continue to go through this cycle of losing pension? How do we attract investments if we don't have currency stability? How do we invest into energy infrastructure, long-term financing, if we don't know what will be our currency tomorrow? We are changing our currency every 6 months, every 9 months. So this is my desire, and government must lead the way. We need a whole system approach where we want to hear what is happening in the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of production. How are they going to cut this import of food? How is Minister of Industry and Commerce going to cut importation of toothpicks, chewing gums, and Pampers, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals? We are number 2 in terms of competitiveness in Africa, but we spend over $300 million importing pharmaceuticals, drugs. Tissue and paper, we spend over $300 million, yet we have a lot of trees in Chimanimani. So this $4 billion I'm talking about is money which we can domesticate, which we are wasting money importing. So how do we defend the currency? So this is my submission, and I'll be happy to take questions. I'm here. Let's talk.
Thanks, Gift. I think that's a very good outline. I think there are 2 things that come up. First and foremost is we have clearly demonstrated that the ZIG won't work, that ZIG will face the same fate as the 5 previous currencies, mainly due to the volatile exchange rate, that the inflation remains high, our disposable incomes have not increased, dwindling foreign currency supply means that we are chasing the dollar. Therefore, and you are suggesting that the only way that the ZIG can work is if it's based in production. But as you know, production is a long-term process. Industrialization is a long-term process, even in the midterm. So, my first question is, why has the legacy of printing money went back to 14th November 1997? I remember that day very clearly. The collapse of the Zim dollar from 1 to 10 to 1 to 18 in 80% fall in 24 hours. Why has that legacy been sustained almost 30 years now? Why?
Right. Can I come in?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Prof. I would want to argue that it's politics. When you look at that 14 November, it was a directive from, this is well documented from the late president, that we must print money. Let me fast track to 5 April 2024. The governor of Central Bank was very clear that his predecessor, Dr. Manguja, was printing money to fund treasury requirements. And he actually mocked giving a statement that used to give it a name. And so it also tells you that there was political pressure for him to print money. We have seen that even during campaigning, the president, President Idi Mnangagwa, made it very clear that this new, these are his words, this second term, he is going to be focusing on building. And if you check my argument with the Minister of Finance, they have to finance construction, and they've seen the momentum have increased in terms of building roads, building dams. So there's a political policy direction given by the powers that be, and these other line ministries and central bank will find themselves having to comply with it. Look at how we are making decisions to please SADC. right? Just for 1 week or 3 days, I don't know how many days it's going to be. It's a political decision, and the levers of government have to follow. So, as far as I'm concerned, Ministry of Finance have got good economists, so a central bank, but they cannot make the economic decision. It's politics. Look at my last comment: command agriculture. If I say command agriculture, I'm actually putting I'm making it smaller. The Ministry of Agriculture late last year launched Rural Development 8.0, meaning that there are 8 areas of interventions. That is your presidential inputs, command agriculture, fisheries, goats, horticulture, up to 8 focus areas in Fumbudza, right? Smart agriculture. And Fumbudza has got over 2-3 million people who have to be given some inputs. So what is going to happen? They will print money to fund that because already the program has been set. So it's political decision which is driving us into printing of money. Over to you.
Yeah. So in the same vein, isn't it rather cynical for those who are criticizing government for this introduction of ZIG to expect government to pay for services and supplies in ZIG instead of US dollars? Are you asking them to commit suicide? Or are you just testing their confidence issue? Why are you insisting that if government wants ZIG to work, let them set the example by allowing people to buy fuel using ZIG, to pay for passport fees and so on and so forth? Is this?
Sorry, Prof. I lost you. My internet is not stable. It just gone off. If you can summarize.
No, I was just asking the constant sort of what can I call it, teasing of government, that if government is sincere about the ZIG, why don't they allow people to buy fuel using ZIG, to pay for passport fees using ZIG, and so on and so forth? Isn't it a cynical remark, given what you have said? Wouldn't that expose government and even cause the ZIG to fall, to collapse earlier than expected? You got that?
Yeah, so you're saying if it was interrupted, if government allows use of ZIG in payment of passport and fuel, is it not going to crash or to lose value, right? Is it what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it won't lose value because look, it will minimize black market activities. Because once I get paid, if I am a civil servant, I work in the private sector, I don't need to change my ZIG to buy fuel. So so you minimize your traffic to black market. So you reduce the pressure on the black market. Because what people want, Prof, is not a currency. Even if I can take a banana.
I'm just saying to you, isn't it obvious why government can't allow fuel and other services to be purchased in ZIG? Isn't it obvious, given what you're saying?
It is obvious. I mean, I would say it's obvious in the sense that the policymakers also have got interest in the economy. That's the obvious thing. I want to qualify it. It's not obvious in the sense that it will result in the depreciation of the local currency, not at all. But they don't want the currency because they also have interest in those sectors, right? Okay. So then it shows hypocrisy. It shows hypocrisy. Then why should I then waste my time also supporting the same currency if you don't like it?
Okay. Now, Khadija has a question. Khadija, Sharif?
Yes, I thank you. I just wanted to mention that a lot of it is due to corruption in terms of how fiscal policy is managed. When the bond dollar, the BOLA, was out, it wasn't backed by any collateral as should have been legally required. So not by any assets. It was backed by a foreign debt. And when the notes were being printed by the German firm, it came at a cost of $24 million or more a year. And that was a substantially higher cost per note than should have been, 4 cents per note. And I think the printing only stopped at that time when the German government, alongside the United Nations, said the company has to cease its terrible business of enabling sanctioned regimes. Then previously, when they were printing the bond dollars, they used very secretive credit facilities for about $600 million extended by Afrexim Bank. It's a private bank owned by governments of Sudan, Nigeria, as well as Zimbabwe, and the Russian state as an indirect shareholder. And as long as the Afrexim Bank facility was open, the debt underlying those bond notes accrues interest at rates that are unknown and unchecked. And the longer the interest continues to accumulate, the weaker the value of the note, the higher inflation becomes, in Zimbabwe's case, hyperinflation. And so Afrexim Bank, I think they mentioned, all agreements were confidential, but that cost amounted to $8 billion in total. So the way in which they create the concept of money, RTGS, as a near money mechanism, is something that's not pegged to real assets, as should be, which then allows for inflation to spiral. So it comes down to the fact that the people who are in charge of the creation of money simply want to create something that allows for them to continue their projects without actually linking it to anything real. And in any economy, there would be hyperinflation. In Zimbabwe's case, it moves faster, it fast tracks at an indescribable speed because of the way that corruption determines how money is created.
Okay, Khadija, Gift, do you want to come in on that? Or can I let Khadija come in effectively now and make a presentation?
A presentation?
You want to comment on that before Khadija continue their own presentation?
Not at all. I think it's very clear.
You understood what she said?
Yes, I got it.
The element of corruption in the manner in which the currency issue has been manipulated over the years. I didn't know until now that basically the manner in which the bond notes were printed in Germany was nothing less than corruption. Yeah, were you aware of that?
Yeah, I got it, but I was shocked. These are things beyond our eyes. But it's quite alarming. And also, the same can be questioned on the bond note to say, what is the difference? And once the systems are as corrupt as this, there's no trust. So I'm agreeing with her. I can't dispute that because something which was just a liberation to me, I'm in shock. Over to you, Prof.
Khadija, can you continue with your presentation now?
Yes.
Let's go back where you started.
Thank
the
you.
Relationship between the issue of corruption and the currency crisis in Zimbabwe. Khadija, Khadija is an investigative journalist based in South Africa. She's done fantastic work over the years on corruption issues in the region, not just Zimbabwe, but in the region, including South Africa itself. Khadija, please, your floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I think just in context of the global financial system, Zimbabwe is a good example of why sanctions and mutual legal assistance requests and so forth don't work. On the ground, you have a dominant political party where corruption is institutionalized and shapes the way that the state performs, and that the party itself performs like a multinational with its own parallel economy. It operates in multiple jurisdictions, companies that may be known or unknown, activities that may be formalized or extra-legal. And across the region, as well as in Zimbabwe, you have the dominant parties that are suspended above the societies it ostensibly governs. They legitimate rule by manipulating the liberation struggle as their reason for staying in power. They repurpose the state apparatus through militarism and financial secrecy. They use nationalism to maintain a class of elites or oligarchs that gain benefit through political capital, but still use defensive language of this is what happened during colonialism. And they settle differences within the party rather than within the state, within a state of democracy. So the fiscal social contract is then suspended between citizens and the state. And for that reason, we can see why regimes like Zimbabwe lean towards China and Russia increasingly, because the same authoritarian system is in place. And those regimes mirror each other, the state of economic capture, where things are fast-tracked towards a hidden and corrupt privatization of assets that creates a class of elites that then prop up the regime that's in place. So you have this false brothers in arms mentality across the region, and South Africa's ANC is a part of that, part of what's happening in Zimbabwe and Botswana and Namibia with SWAPO and Frelimo and so forth, because they use the same 5 principles of staying in power. And externally, those sanctions and those mutual legal assistance requests don't have any value, because capital, regardless of origin, whether it's stolen or not, is conferred a privilege in jurisdictions like Mauritius, the UAE, Switzerland, which we'll come to as it relates to Zimbabwe. And it basically means that capital can lose the Zimbabwe jacket and put on the jacket of Switzerland or the UAE as it needs. So while a human being will be caught and put into a detention center as soon as they cross a border, capital can move as it wants because of the privilege that the world has given it. So the way in which these legal vehicles repurpose and reroute money, regardless of its origin, is almost wholly legal in many different places. So they can rent out these jurisdictions. It's normative, and many jurisdictions have commercialized their sovereignty to invite this kind of capital in. They create virtual vehicles. Your money can move within 24 hours. You can create a new company within 48 hours without ever stepping foot in another place. And this works for debt, for assets, for public contracts, commodities, and flows. So as relates to Zimbabwe's currency, why is there dollar scarcity? Why is there hyperinflation? 2 years ago, we did an investigation into Zimbabwe's blackouts and the connection with the Zimbabwean dollar. So fuel supply was one of the biggest costs. According to the central bank's own disclosures, fuel supply was one of the biggest costs. It has to be purchased in Forex, and there was no fuel to be found. With the darkness came famine. Zimbabwe's biggest sector was agriculture, and farmers need at least 40% of inputs as fuel, which is then priced in dollars. And we had a source of data, and we were able to see that from 2013, 2014, as the current president came to power, he, as a deputy and then as the president, he allocated the fuel monopoly to his right hand through the National Oil Company, and Tagurai's firm got it, Secunda. Then under the guise of a joint venture in 2014, Tagurai shared this monopoly with Trafigura, a Swiss commodity trader, overvaluing the shares of his company. It gave Trafigura stakeholder rights in the country to basically control the economy. They got control of the pipeline, the fuel storage center, the volume and value of fuel flowing into the country itself. So Trafigura described their own role as price maker and price taker in Zimbabwe. And for this, Trafigura paid Tagurai about $100 million in fees to him as an individual, not to the company, from 2014 until 2018. So that's effectively $25 million a year to one individual, who then paid out various people within the party. And it gave this Swiss commodity trader a near monopoly over the entire fuel economy and everything that depended on fuel. And that went into his Swiss bank account, Pictet. The former finance minister, Tendai Biti, said that only one set of interests controls this economy, Trafigura and Tagurai. Now, Zimbabwe couldn't afford to pay Trafigura the dollar price of the fuel, and they had a debt ceiling. So Trafigura then loaned over $1 billion with a monthly interest rate of 16.5% that doubled and tripled as they defaulted. And Trafigura called this a prepayment to circumvent Parliament from finding out. So most of the foreign currency had to then pass through to a Swiss commodity trader that corruptly obtained a near fuel monopoly and was then able to control how much of fuel came in, how that fuel was priced, and even the interest rates on the cost of the dollar that was being used to pay for the fuel through an advance loan. And when this kind of came out, they then shifted to Mauritius with a new company where the central bank governor was the protector of a trust of that company, and where Tagurai himself had, WhatsApp messages showing that the president was the one who was shaping the terms, the conditions, demanding certain things in advance, and the regime or the corporate aspect of the dominant party under the president was considered a shareholder in this company. So in one WhatsApp message, it says he wants the money to be paid after I show him the directors and the owners of the SOTIC document, and he was His Excellency, it was the president. In another document, it describes the role of John Mangudia, then the central bank governor, who was also part of the holding company of the system. So why did they structure a new fuel/dollar mechanism using the UAE and Mauritius? Because the UAE offers the same thing that many different jurisdictions do, legal and financial secrecy. But where sanctions come to the fore, the UAE provides no response to mutual legal assistance. So if a government like South Africa is asking for financial flows, shareholders, activities related to bank accounts, even extradition, the UAE will let it sit for a number of years, bounce it back on the basis of technicalities. This translation isn't correct, that stamp isn't correct, refile it. Then both files will be cancelled in the system because now there are multiple entries and people have to start again. So they extend the process of MLA requests for years and years until the whole system has changed and the request is basically voided. I'll stop there, but that's where a significant portion of Zimbabwe's dollars went. That's how the debt system was created. We can go into the domestic bonds that ended up competing with foreign debt and which were not backed by anything. But essentially, the hyperinflation comes down to how the dollars are used, how the system was repurposed, and who benefited from that system. Certainly not the public, who was forced to pay the price.
How does one break that cycle, Khadija?
I think very easily. I think very easily. Like the problem for me as a journalist with civil society is that they sometimes make problems seem insurmountable, as if it's endemic, as if there's an incapacity to change the system. But these things can change overnight if there's enough public pressure, feet to the pavement, in the sense of barefoot politics. An NGO does not have enough power to change the performance of a government, but the public can. The public is terrifying to people in power. The public is the most, excuse my language, fucking terrifying to corrupt people in power. They just don't want the public to know their power. So if a government decided to end this double taxation agreement with Mauritius, there'd be no benefit to setting up companies in Mauritius because now they'd be taxed normally. So the taxation would have to occur at source point in Zimbabwe. If the government decided to create registries, to publish contracts, to disclose in, a beneficial ownership information, country by country reporting, it means that companies linked to Trafigura as joint venture partners, as subsidiaries, as affiliated companies would have to disclose net book value, where employees are located, where profits are recorded, where taxes are paid. And all of that would create such a big disincentive because Trafigura was not allowed to pay Tagirai, an individual, $100 million over 4 or 5 years. You don't get to pay an individual who's a politically exposed person. But they did because there was no country by country reporting mandatorily required of them as a company. Parliament needs to ensure that prepayments or advances of cash are considered part of the loan system. A prepayment should not circumvent what is a loan. So there are many easy ways to make mandatory and disincentivize corruption and parallel economies from happening. But it doesn't happen because sometimes, in my view, civil society likes to make the problem seem bigger than it should be, and that excludes people from being part of the solution. If you talk to people on their level, explain to them what's happening, and demand a response from them, people will respond. But if we talk to each other using a language that is exclusionary, people cannot participate in a reality that primarily and dramatically affects their lives.
Khadija, you're aware of the status of civil society in Zimbabwe, not to mention even your own country, South Africa. And
yeah.
The level of information, the kind of information that you're putting on the table here is far beyond even the best of journalists in our country. It's things they've not been able to unravel. That's why we have to get people like yourself and Nick Donovan to assist us. It's how do we improve the level of information, the flow of information, the intricacies such as those you have just described, where, for example, what you have just said, the major deals are made within the infrastructure sector, the financial sector, and the fuel sector. And these are the areas in which the corruption has been most rife in our country. And there's no doubt the relationship between the kind of corruption that's taking place there and the financial crisis that we have in our country. But what's your proposal in terms of making this kind of information more accessible to the public? I've not seen your own work for 3 years now. You know, are you being muzzled in South Africa? What's happening?
So, you know, financial literacy, even where people have the right to vote in electoral democracies, the absence of financial literacy shapes how people engage with their government, because they're not being as surgical as they should be in demanding the answers that they need, want, and should have. So, in my view, there needs to be financial literacy. And this is not a sexy thing, but this needs to happen, because when people understand what to demand of their parliamentarians, and they take to the streets demanding changes in policy and in law, journalists can focus on scoops, but that doesn't change. That's a reactive thing. We focus on something after it has happened. What we need to do is prevent these things from happening in the first place by forcing legislation and policy that disincentivizes certain behavior. So just the things we mentioned: automatic information exchange, beneficial ownership disclosure, country by country reporting. These are basic things that people need to force through parliament with their feet. People need to protest, not for an hour, for days. And they need to protest in a brave way. They need to be willing, as they are in Zimbabwe, to go to prison for it. You need to put your life on the line for something to change. Journalists and NGOs cannot do that, but people can. People are a powerful and terrifying force to those in power. That's why those in power try to desensitize, try to, create distractions. They participate in things like EITI. No offense to EITI, but that only looks at what government stole, not what companies should have paid. And what's happening is that kickbacks are being structured as service payments in shell companies. So even before the theft can occur, the kickback has been paid. So we need to make the public educated and surgical, and then ensure that they can protest, because that public pressure, the momentum, is what will change the law. The laws need to be changed. Journalists and NGOs can only catch up and react to what's happening. We can't change the law, but the people can.
Oh, that begs the question, Khadija. We just don't have in our society the capacity to do the things you're talking about, and you're a rare fish in this exercise. But anyway, I'll come back to you. I want to get down to Nick Donovan to come in and perhaps elaborate on the points that have been raised by Khadija. In particular, we'd like to know the capability of the Northern Hemisphere, in particular the UK and the US, in the kind of the processes taking place in Zimbabwe, not only with respect to the currency crisis, but the economic crisis generally. It cannot be just Zimbabwe on its own. What are the international linkages out there? Nick, welcome, Nick. Nick is from Sentry. Sentry has done some excellent work on the region, and generally Sentry have been doing work across the world. And Nick more recently visited Zimbabwe and did some good work. Nick.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to follow Professor Magano and Khadija, my colleague. So, Ibo, please remind me to answer that question about the culpability of the West and the UK, and the way that some of the money is being sucked out of Zimbabwe towards the City of London, for example. I can come on to that.
Yeah, what I meant, Nick, was that basically, in the narrative on corruption in the South, that the North is equally culpable.
Yeah.
And Khadija just made reference to the role of the UAE, Dubai in particular, and also Mauritius. But we also know that London is a center of money laundering. And indeed, I mean, the narrative about the position of funds, loot 15 billion from diamonds, average of 6 billion a year, they say, in leakages in the mineral receipts. The money is going somewhere. It's not in Zimbabwe for sure.
Yeah.
It's out there. Tell us what you know.
Just on a technical question, I wanted to share my screen to show some documents.
Okay.
Show the V11s. If someone could allow the screen sharing. Just while I'm waiting for the screen to share, just to answer, we did an investigation involving Kuda Tagore buying some of the mines that ended up in Kuvimba Mining House, and the money ended up in the UK, and we were able to show how slowly the money was moved. So it started off in his Pictet bank account that Khadija mentioned, and derived originally from his partnership with Trafigura, and then he set up an offshore company called Sotic in Mauritius to try and move the money out of Zimbabwe. And the idea was to keep all the money offshore, and he created fake invoices, or his team created fake invoices in order to move money out of Zimbabwe to Mauritius, and then they moved the money to the UK. So I can talk a bit more about that and some of the sort of techniques that we use, but definitely in terms of the big picture about capital flight, some of it definitely ends up in London, where it's arrived pretty clean, apparently, because people deliberately aren't asking in some cases the right questions about where it's arriving from. And the intermediary stages, it's cleaned within Mauritius to allow it to look like it's, you know, from a, in this case, from a, they pretended it was from a group of Far Eastern investors in a Mauritius company, which was not the case. So let me share a screen. So I want to talk a little bit about the macroeconomics. I'm not an economist, but an investigative journalist. And together with Khadija, we've been looking at certain documents for a while, which have a and certain scandals which have a macroeconomic impact in Zimbabwe. So, I'm afraid I still can't share my screen, David. Okay, so I still see host disabled participant screen sharing.
I'll try again now.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So can people see, yeah, where macro and micro meet? Okay, so we're just going to talk a little bit about the growth in reserve money and what that means for inflation and currency depreciation back in 2019. So not about ZIG, but the last time Zimbabwe tried to introduce a new currency, and some of the decisions that the Reserve Bank made that led to the decline in the currency and the growth of inflation, according to the International Monetary Fund. Now, the IMF aren't the fount of all knowledge, but they do talk a lot to both Zimbabwe Treasury officials and market participants as part of putting together what are called their Article 4 consultations, these reports that they put out. And these two charts, the one on the left is from the 2019 Article 4 consultation from the IMF, and the one on the right is from the 2022 one, I think. And what they show is a real close correlation between the growth in reserve money, so that is money printing by the central bank, and the inflation rate. And then on the right, you can, which is a slightly different chart, it's the rate of change, so the year-on-year percentage change. When inflation was really galloping away from 2019 onwards, it was very closely following the growth in reserve money. So what was going on with reserve money, and what was the RBZ doing at the time? Well, obviously some of it is just about bad allocation of resources, so misallocation of resources, but some of it is about money printing for less than productive purposes, one might say, but also to those with political connections. So what the IMF reported back in 2019 is that reserve money rose sharply, and they blame that on what they call quasi-fiscal operations by the RBZ. So it's in a sense public expenditure by the central bank, and they blame in particular the printing of money to pay a 0.8% of GDP. So this is a very large, in the context of Zimbabwe's small economy, a very large treasury bill held by a domestic firm. And as I'll come on to say, this domestic firm is Secunda, Kuda Tagore's company. And then they also blame the provision of foreign exchange to fuel importers and an introduction of an export incentive for gold purchases financed by a reserve money expansion of about 400 million a month. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk quite a bit about this treasury bill and how the money was printed in order to meet the treasury bill, and then a little bit about the gold incentives for the Reserve Bank, and then going to end on a sort of question about the Reserve Bank's ability to take its discretion to take decisions and to possibly favour the politically connected, which is how what might be termed favoritism or cronyism, or in some cases, if it was proven in a court, corruption, then translates into macroeconomic consequences. So we did a project looking at command agriculture, and from 2016 to 2019, Secunda Holdings, Tagore's firm, ran command agriculture. It was paid for by the government. It wasn't paid for by Secunda. They lent money to Secunda in the form of treasury bills. Treasury bills are a form of IOU. Imagine it's a IOU for 1 year. It could be for 5 years, but imagine it's for 1 year. If they lend you $100, then at the end of the year, they're going to pay you, if it's 5%, $105 back. So the government, in the form of Patrick Chinamasa, the finance minister, writes to the Reserve Bank governor saying, please issue this treasury bill to Secunda. And in this case, it's for 106 million. And then that is issued by the Reserve Bank. They draw up a term sheet. And in here, this one is for the same amount. If you look on the very far right-hand side, it's 106 million again. And this is then taken by Secunda and either kept and cashed in at the end of the year, or much more likely, they sell it to one of the banks. And in essence, this is printing money. This is the creation of a sort of quasi-monetary asset by the central bank. And nothing wrong with that if it's being used for productive purposes. It's, you know, perhaps it shouldn't be done by the central bank, but by the treasury, and they should borrow on the open market. There might be an argument about that, but in theory, there's nothing wrong with that. There was a problem, which I'll come on to, is that when the new currency was introduced on 22nd of February 2019, so when the Zimbabwe dollar was introduced through statutory instrument 33, at that point in time, all US dollar denominated assets and debts were redenominated in Zimbabwe dollars. So this is obviously causing chaos across a lot of debtors and lenders, and the effect was also felt by those holders of treasury bills. So here are two companies, nothing to do with Secunda, they certainly didn't, nothing wrong. They held treasury bills, and before and after the new currency, they held them in US dollars in 2019, if you look at those middle columns. So Mimosa or Zimplats held one for 3.4 million, sorry, 11.4 million. And then in 2021, that was redenominated into 11.4 million in Zimbabwe dollars. And at that point in time, because of the depreciation of the currency, that was a reduction of almost 100-fold, and the US dollar equivalent, by the time it was redenominated in Zimbabwe dollars, was 117,000 US dollars. So an asset that was given to a company, in this case Zimplats, was kind of wiped out by the introduction of statutory instrument 33. And at this point in time, in February 22nd, 2019, Secunda held a really large treasury bill. It was 366 million. It was the same treasury bill that was referred to by the IMF back here when they said it's the 0.8% of GDP. So Secunda was this firm, and they benefited from a decision by the Reserve Bank not to turn that 366 million US dollar denominated treasury bill into a Zimbabwe dollar denominated treasury bill, in effect to wipe out a lot of the value. They were protected, and that treasury bill, some of it was returned, and this is exactly the same treasury bill that we're talking about in these two letters, which letters, by the way, Khadija was the first person to realize their significance. And what's going on in these letters is that one person who's working for Tagore at this time writes to John Manguja, the governor of the Reserve Bank, and asks for a liquidation of 40 million US dollars, or 40 million US, to be turned into Zimbabwe dollars, not at a rate of 1-to-1, but at a rate of 1 to 5.5. So this is very soon after the change. And the Reserve Bank does this, and it prints money in order to repay one of Tagore's firms, in this case Landella, which was holding the treasury bill at that point in time. And then you look on the right-hand side, they're buying Bindura nickel, and they want to liquidate another treasury part of the treasury bill, which is worth US 21 million, again at the same 5.5 million, 5.5 interbank rate, not the 1-to-1 interbank rate. So in essence, Secunda, Landella, and Tagore should have been screwed over by statutory instrument 33, but they weren't. They were protected because they were given a more favorable exchange rate of the day. And so what this means is that, in theory, that 21 million US and that 39 million US is around 60 million. That should have been converted into Zimbabwe dollars and giving them an equivalent of about US 11 million. So it really should have been cut in value. But instead, on the right-hand side, you see this protection that they received. They received far more RTGS Zimbabwe dollars, about 334 million at this point in time. And so there's a lot of money printing going on in order to satisfy this demand for this favorable exchange rate. And this is a decision taken by the Reserve Bank. And so this is what the IMF are blaming for some of the growth in reserve money at the time. And actually, they were almost certainly cashing in higher proportions of that 366 million, that 0.8% of GDP treasury bill. Here's a bank statement for Secunda. They're receiving about 500 million Zimbabwe dollars at this point in time, which is a bit later on in August 2019. And this implies that they were cashing in, it was a rate of 1-to-10 at the time. This implies that they should have been getting about 50 million Zimbabwe dollars rather than 500 million. So there's a lot of money printing going on, and participants in the market, so people buying and selling dollars at the time, were saying that there was this just big demand for US dollars at the time, because the people who were receiving these Zimbabwe dollars were trying to sell them as quickly as possible and buy US dollars. And this started to cause the exchange rate to decline. So you have this decision to protect a favored presidential advisor, a crony of the president, and this decision to protect causes the printing presses to be turned on, which, according to the IMF, has a knock-on effect on currency depreciation and inflation. And I've got to say, Mr. Tagore denies all of this very vehemently, and this is not his opinion at all. He's got a different opinion, and perhaps you want to bring him on to answer this at certain points. But we produce a report, and we put all of his responses in our report, so you can read his responses there. So now I want to talk about something else that the Reserve Bank does. So the Reserve Bank, and this is particularly important in the context of ZIG, I would imagine, being a partly gold-backed currency, is that the Reserve Bank has a subsidiary, Fidelity, which buys gold. And in order to stop the gold being smuggled out through the gold mafia story that we've all seen, they offer, try and offer as attractive rates as they can. And what we see here on the right is Scott Sakatwanya, his company, Better Brands Jewelry, making a request to the Reserve Bank, to Fidelity, for a higher rate of incentives. So for every $100 of gold that they sell to the Reserve Bank, what they're asking for is $135, so 35% incentive. They're asking for a higher rate. And this kind of request implies that there's an element of discretion within the Reserve Bank, that you can make a decision to offer higher rates. And this is an environment in which corruption could occur, because you could offer a higher rate to a politically connected gold dealer rather than a non-politically connected gold seller. I've got no evidence that Scott was awarded this higher rate. I'm not sure whether he did or not, but he certainly believed that he could make an application, and the Fidelity might entertain the idea. And this element of discretion is seen in both this sort of gold buying operation, but also in the gold export incentive schemes that have operated on and off over the years. And the next slide is really about a letter to one of Kamlesh Patni's companies called Suzanne General Trading. And this letter was dug up by Al Jazeera for gold mafia. And I just want to draw people's attention to it. When RTGS was introduced, it was backed up by, or ostensibly backed up by, money from Afreximbank alone. And that was partly to, at the time it was announced that it was partly to pay for export incentives. So there was a scheme to encourage exports, to bring in foreign currency into Zimbabwe, which obviously will again be important under ZIG, because partly it's backed by foreign exchange reserves. And Kamlesh is asking for a higher rate, or has actually achieved a higher rate of export incentives. So the way the export incentives worked were, if you were selling gold and you were selling $100 worth of gold outside of the country, and then bringing that $100 back into the country, you'd fill in your CD1 form, and then the Reserve Bank would pay your bank account in CBZ or somewhere else $118. So you'd get your $100 and you'd get $18 export incentive on top. The problem is that at the time, everyone else was getting 105, or was getting 5% export incentive, or halfway through they increased it to 10% for gold. So Kamlesh was receiving a higher rate of export incentives than other sellers at this time. And this was paid for by the Reserve Bank printing money. This is one of the examples of reserve money expansion. So it has I don't know how large Kamlesh's operation was. He was said to be one of the, by Ewan Macmillan claimed in the film that he was the largest gold dealer, but he was receiving public funds at a higher rate than some of the other gold sellers. And of course, he claimed in the video to be paying appreciation money to number one in his video. Now, obviously, Mr. Patni denies all of this, and I'm sure the president would as well. We don't have any, he might just be bluffing, and he might be exaggerating his ability to get do business in Zimbabwe on the film, and maybe we should take everything he says with a pinch of salt. But we should definitely listen to this document, because it's backed up by other documents that I've seen, and it's also of a piece with Kamlesh Patni's past experience in Kenya, where he ran a gold scam called the Goldenberg scandal, and he was also getting export incentives there, and on that case on fictitious gold exports, and he was just getting the export incentives, and there was no gold really exported. And in this particular case, the deal that was described by Kamlesh Patni in the Gold Mafia documentary made no commercial sense to me. So the Reserve Bank is buying gold from people like Scott Sakatwanya. It's then giving it to Orex. Orex is a subsidiary of the Reserve Bank. It's making gold jewelry. The gold jewelry is not then sold to a buyer in Dubai, but it's then sold to Kamlesh Patni in Zimbabwe, and Kamlesh Patni then exports it to Dubai, where he gets the 18% export incentive. So why the Reserve Bank isn't selling directly into Dubai and therefore just skipping the payment of the export incentive and getting a better deal for the Reserve Bank and the fiscus, I don't know. You'd have to ask the Reserve Bank, but there's grounds for investigation if the Zimbabwean authorities were so minded. So taking a step back, what we see is the Reserve Bank taking decisions on the issuance of the payment of treasury bills and the rates at which gold sellers are rewarded and the rates at which gold exporters are rewarded in the past, that have a large degree of discretion that John Manguja exercised, and presumably the new governor will as well. And maybe there's a totally new broom and this will not happen again, but we really should keep an eye out on Reserve Bank discretion, because it's the better approach would be, right, this is the rate that we're going to buy gold from, publish it on the Reserve Bank website so everybody can see, and gold buyers can go to the Reserve Bank and get the same rate as everybody else, and just be transparent about what the price is. Similarly, if you really must have an export incentive, then again, be transparent to make sure everyone gets the same amount. And the second sort of implication of what we see is you really need to keep an eye out on who receives these treasury bills. There was a very good article in the News Talks last week, and I hate to question their editorial in the decisions, but I thought it should have been the front page rather than buried in the middle. It was that the Mutapa Investment Fund, so the Sovereign Wealth Fund, was going to buy out the 35% management stake of Kavimba Mining House, which is one of the companies under the Mutapa Investment Fund. And it was going to pay 1.6 billion treasury bill, 1.6 billion US treasury bill to the management of Kavimba for that 35% stake of all of those mines that were held by Kavimba. Now, Kavimba, there's been long persistent rumors, and I reported on it back in 2021, that Tagore has a stake in Kavimba. This is widely reported. And so the rationale for the buying out of the 35% was to end all speculation about who and whether Tagore is a hidden shareholder in Kavimba, and he's always denied being a hidden shareholder in Kavimba. But we've previously published in 2021 documents showing that one of the companies within the ownership structure, called Fimbi Resources, the owners were the Kudu Kwashwe Tagore Trust. Now, I don't know what the structure is at the moment, so maybe Tagore is no longer involved, and maybe he wasn't the recipient of a 1.6 billion treasury bill denominated in US dollars. But if the reporting in the News Talks is accurate, that means that a very large, in relation to the size of the Zimbabwean economy, has been issued to the management of Kavimba. 1.6 billion, to put it in context, the size of the Zimbabwean economy in 2021, 2022 is about 24 billion. So 1.6 billion to 22 billion, very large proportion of the annual GDP figure. And real question about if it's, say it's 1 year, a 1 year tenor or a 1 year length of this treasury bill, when they go to cash it in, where are these US dollars going to come from? And if it's cashed in ZiG, are they recipients of that ZiG, the management of Kavimba, are they going to try and rapidly turn that into US dollars, and what's that going to do to the exchange rate? So this is an example where you look at some of the micro decisions, like buying 35% of Kavimba and spending public money to do so, and then wonder whether in a year's time, or perhaps 5 years' time, if it's a longer dated treasury bill, whether it's going to have a macro effect. Okay, I'll stop there, but thanks very much for having me.
Incredible stuff. Thanks, Nick. It's all very startling. What an interesting narrative. Puts our journalists to shame. that we have to rely on people like yourselves out there to give us this sad narrative. Tell me, Nick, in other countries, what you describe as discretion on the part of the Reserve Bank, how would that be described in other countries? Would that be criminal,
Well,
or just corruption?
in England, we don't, we don't like to say things like that. But I love the way that in Zimbabwe everything's called looting, and in England it would be called discretion. So, what I want to say is that this kind of allocation of resources to politically connected people is exactly happening in my country through COVID PPE purchases. So very politically connected people are doing it, and as soon as the transparency rules around public procurement were lifted, Brits behaved, and British politicians behaved in exactly the same way as Zimbabwean politicians. There's nothing about nationality that dictates behavior. It's all about the rules and the transparency disclosure requirements which govern politicians' behavior. So as soon as we lifted those during the COVID pandemic, we had the same problem of looting or discretion. And it's about rules and institutions. And I think the fewer, the less ability that the new governor has to take decisions in secret and to take decisions which aren't being reviewed and held accountable by the Public Accounts Committee, and by a very vibrant press. I think the press in Zimbabwe does a really good job. I build all of my cases on stuff that they've done, and essentially I see myself as colouring in the outlines that they have already drawn with more detail. But if you have a Reserve Bank governor taking these decisions in secret and only coming to light 5 years later through leaks, then it's not sufficient of a kind of accountability. You need parliamentary accountability to work, I would say.
Yes, if there's a parliament. Right, we have a few minutes to go. Any hands up? Tinashe, Urapata, are you there? Anybody wants to come in? We've had very rich presentations here with Nick and Khadija really giving the underpinning to the problem that we have, the crisis that we have. And I don't know how to describe what Nick has just outlined, not to mention what Khadija had to say. And the kingdom of Zimbabwe is rotten, huh? Absolutely. Nobody, all shell-shocked. Shell-shocked by Nick's presentation. Anybody coming in? Lovemo Gadenge?
Hello.
Who's that?
Trying to find the hand to raise.
Yeah, carry on. Who's speaking?
Mabuso.
Yeah, Mabuso. Kunjani mfowethu?
April. You know, I find what's most disempowering. Thank you very much to both presenters. But the most disempowering thing, and that's really where the solution lies, is to make us understand what they are talking about. This financial literacy is a huge barrier. Is there a way of saying what they are saying in a manner that can be understood by people who even have some education like myself, but have absolutely no clue most of the time what they're talking about? Can this be simplified? Because the action that's required by society will not be taken unless people understand what this thing is all about. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mabuso. I think this point refers. Our forum tends to be too academic, and I agree entirely. And I would request both Khadija and Nick to perhaps this. By the way, this is on Facebook. It'll be on YouTube tomorrow, so it's being recorded. We will on our side here, the Secretariat, try and simplify it and have it written. But is there anything you can say, Khadija and Nick, as to how to maybe summarize what you had to say, which I understand as the intricate and complex machinations of the corruption game in our countries, very refined in many cases, a nice language called discretion, but really it's borders on pure theft. Khadija, anything to say in response to Mavuso? Your country,
Yes.
your compatriot.
I just wanted to mention that Nick's presentation was so excellent. And again, he touched on Afrexim Bank, and Zimbabwe has paid Afrexim Bank, a private bank listed on the Irish Stock Exchange, over $8 billion in interest payments. And that's another part of the enabler system, these private entities, the hedge funds that boost the liquidities of the banks, making odious debt available to regimes, deepening and broadening the continuation of those regimes. So there's a whole network of enablers, law firms, accountants, bankers that are based in the terribly respectable countries. And we've seen that things like the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, don't look at financial and legal secrecy jurisdictions that enable corruption all over the world. What they look at is who is their political enemies, and they weaponize against that. So the whole global system is a game that's rigged against the people of the world, from Britain to Zimbabwe. And as Nick said, you know, nationality is not the issue, because in the United States, tremendous corruption, and not just corruption, wrongdoing, where people are just destroyed so that the 1% can take everything. And that happens in legalized ways, and in other countries in Africa in extra legal ways, you know, outside the law. But in terms of financial literacy, the most important thing is that we speak to the human being who has the power to make change. And it's not that any of us are smarter, it's just that we've spent more time learning this special language. In ancient Egypt, there were a small group of people called scribes. They were the only ones who can read and write, and they did the accounting and created the taxes on behalf of the kingdom and on behalf of the priests, who were as powerful as the kings, because they controlled the value of money, the value of stocks. And so this system continues. The modern day scribes are the people who speak this particular vernacular, the accountants, the lawyers. They create language that is just above the realm of human understanding, so that people are not invited into the conversation. And the way to invite people into the conversation is by using mechanisms that they listen to, radio, WhatsApp, and taking 3,000 word stories down, or big NGO reports down, to the basics, 500 words. This is what happened. This is what they called it. This is who was responsible. And making these things something that is translated into the language of people who are very busy with barefoot politics and bare cupboards, trying to buy medicine, deciding between electricity and fuel. That's the reality of lives, and we can't sneer at their lives or say they're doing less than they should, because life is so hard. So how do we make it our job to make it accessible to them? Take it to radio, take it to WhatsApp, take it to Facebook, and speak in a simple language, because we put things on the record, but they have the power to change the world around them.
Yeah, but Khadija, to take Mavuso's question and to put a figure you just mentioned, that Zimbabwe owes Afrexim Bank $8 billion in interest.
Has been paying them. Yes, has been paying them.
Yes,
and
paid that, paying to Afrexim. It's been paid?
Yeah, it's been paid, and it's disclosed. You know, they publish reports, they publish data, it's listed on the Irish Stock Exchange, and you see that the way in which it's been done is designed to put the devil in the details on the lower end of pages. So a person really has to mine through the fine print, but once you do, it's there. It's not something that's hidden.
Gift, are you aware of this, Gift? Are you aware of this statistic?
No, not at all. I'm in shock. I'm almost collapsed. Maybe if I can add one thing, Prof. Based on
Sorry, very
Nick,
quickly.
Prof, can I add one point?
Yes.
Can I add one point?
Yeah, then I'm also coming.
Thank you very much. I just want to take you back to your question where you said, what is motivating printing of money, which started in 1997? I think Nick just did justice in giving qualified answer on the corruption and political interference in central bank work. I'm sure you saw the same thing on Nick's presentation. Over to you, Prof.
No, thanks. Mavusi, want to come in again?
No, that's clear. I was just wondering, what's the rate? That 8 billion represents what rate of interest?
Khadija?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the entity paying it, but Nick spoke about the creation of money, and that in part goes back to the 600 million that was loaned as collateral for the RTGS, the previous currency, at interest rates that were neither known nor monitored. So nobody could check the interest rate of the 600 million loaned by a Frexim bank to so-called collateralize part of the RTGS. And these are important things because when you're looking at the way that money is being created, and I'll just give you an example of Libya. Gozniak, the sanctioned Russian printer, was printing money for Libya, the central bank. The normal cost of printing a note is 4 cents, right? Gozniak was charging them $6 to $10 per note. So altogether, for $1 billion for the Libyan central bank, it was $100 million to print and fly. That's the cost of printing the physical money by a sanction. So it's not just the way in which the fiscal policy is handled, but also, as we discussed, the corruption involved. What are the interest rates? Who's doing it for them? On what terms? And actually, how much of money is being created in secret? In the case of Libya, nobody knew, because additional amounts of money outside of the formal contract with the money printers was being printed. So more money was entering the system, and it was not backed. It was not collateralized, or it was collateralized with debt. So it's very important, going back to financial literacy, to understand how is your money printed, what is backing that printing, what is the interest rate on the creation of that money. And as Nick mentioned, these treasury bills were being created for corrupt purposes, for secunda, for command agriculture, to pay bills that the country's central bank could not actually cash, could not cover. So those details are very important, but breaking it down for people will create the momentum that causes the protest, because we need people to take to the streets and affirm their agency and protest in ways that get the regime to respond. A journalist or two can be harassed, can be pushed out of a country, the paper can be ignored, but you can't ignore 100,000 people on your streets for a couple of days or weeks in a row. You simply cannot ignore that.
Yes, if the population is well informed as you are. But let's come to the end of this discussion. I want to just put before the panel again, what's the way forward? Let's begin with Nick, and then Khadija again, and then last but not least, Gift. What's the way forward? How to get out of this crisis? Nick?
I'm going to cede my time to Zimbabweans. So I'm just going to, yeah. I'm a little bit depressed, so I would like to hear from others, to be honest.
That's your advice for us. Khadija suggested we go on the streets, but you know that's not possible in our situation.
Yeah.
Technically, I mean, there's been over this new zigzag, as others call it, there's been a lot of debate, and you had a retort from Gideon Gono, who virtually panicked and even suggested maybe there should be a commission of inquiry into the operations of the Reserve Bank over the last 20 years. Do you think that would be a way forward? Commission of inquiry, international commission of inquiry? Maybe led by the bank?
I'll go back to something that Mavuso said. So I think the last time that corruption really captured the public imagination was the Drax affair during COVID, and that was the sheer horror at seemingly politically connected people benefiting at a time of great public need. And I published a report where I think it was the first sort of documents that we had published about suspicious payments to pre-CABE enterprises, so to the President Mnangagwa's farm of 1 million, and to a shell company that was connected to Vice President Chiwenga, called Cosmotex Investments, from a company. And I was very surprised because I think it's technical and people didn't really understand it and get it, but people really understood Drax. They really understood the gold mafia. And I think in terms of thinking about how to tell stories, that there is a missing bit of Zimbabwean journalism, which is around undercover journalism. That in Ghana, Anas is a sort of national hero in some senses for doing undercover journalism to shine lights in a way that you can't normally do with documents, and also bring it alive for people who can see it happening. They can see the money moving. And so I think that if we're going to make a criticism of Zimbabwean journalism, the lack of a tradition of undercover journalism, partly because of safety reasons, I'm certain that might be part of it, but telling those stories in simpler ways might be the way that, let's not talk about street politics, but even within electoral politics, might get corruption higher up the agenda than it is.
Thanks, Nick. Khadija, your last word after a wonderful night.
Thank you. I think I've ranted long enough, but my feeling is legislation meets the power of the people. We need to have the legislation in place to disincentivize these things. As Nick mentioned, the second British corruptors were able to access public funds during the COVID stuff. It happened. It was replicated in Britain. So this is the tendency of a percentage of people where the laws don't exist. And it's not that difficult to pass the laws if people push and protest for it.
Khadija?
Yes, I've stopped talking.
Gift? Your parting shot.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Hello?
Carry on.
Thank you. Ideally, it would be easier for us if we have strong institutions where you can approach the courts and try to get a remedy on some of these ills. No, Zimbabwe is so vulnerable that we don't know what to do. You know what happened on our elections. SADC had their report very clear. Even SADC members have left us as orphans. They've done nothing. You have seen what has happened on the recalls on opposition members. You go to court and the courts are compromised. We can't go on the streets, unfortunately, Khadija, because you know our history of heavy-handedness on government again.
Yeah.
So we are so vulnerable. We know what to do, but we can't do it. And my last point I want to make is that if you look at the presentation by Nick, it shows you that there's a lot of money which is buying power, and we are just voice. We have a voice, and we don't have anything outside that. So the system is so oiled to an extent that you cannot do anything except to wait for God to rescue us. I rest my case.
I just want to say, as a South African born during apartheid, that the power of the people, again, I've said it before, is a terrifying force. Apartheid was a scientific machine that had been backed by the US and the UK, by foreign banks, by foreign arms companies. And the only thing that turned the trajectory of the country's future were students protesting on the streets, which then brought the adults to the streets. You can have your armed movements, but the power of the people needs to come to the fore, and it must be as a force that will not compromise or negotiate. If the power doesn't come from the people, nothing will change. And I can tell you that South Africans under the apartheid regime were as vulnerable or more vulnerable than Zimbabweans are. Because remember, the US and the UK had an investment in keeping the apartheid regime alive because it was the pillar that allegedly, according to propaganda, fought communism in the region. That was a force to be reckoned with, and that came to an end because people protested and said enough was enough. There has to be a tipping point, and that tipping point must be determined by people protesting for change. It has to come from people, or it will never come.
Yes, that's very true. But you must also know that the end of apartheid was a result of a confluence of domestic uprisings, as you've described them, regional lobbying, and international, the international anti-apartheid movement. It's a combination of forces. And I think to end this evening, I think what this discussion has highlighted is the need for a political settlement in Zimbabwe. Return to constitutionalism, rule of law, restoration of the national institutions, and the restoration of separation of powers, and an accountable executive, a vibrant legislature, and a fiercely independent judiciary. All those are lacking in our country. The struggle continues, but this discussion has been so rich. We're glad we have recorded it. It will be on YouTube by tomorrow morning. And of course, we will be publishing this. No doubt about that. But I want to thank Gift. Thank you very much. And for your bravery, for your resilience and persistence, notwithstanding all the attacks on you. We are with you. And I think many Zimbabweans are with you in this fight. Khadija, so thank you very much for coming on board at a very short notice. Yes, usual, fantastic. Do you wonder why I had to pester you night and day to come on the show? Welcome back to the forum. We hope to see you again. And Nick, thanks for the fantastic work you are doing and for sharing with us this evening. We will be pleased to have your paper when you can send it to us. We'd like to publish it in Newshawks at least, but also in our policy documents. Thank you. We meet you again in a fortnight on a topic of your choice.